Good. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the special meeting of the Laguna Beach City Council. We're going to call the meeting to order and begin with a roll call vote. Anne Marie.
Councilmember Jones. Here. Councilmember Kemp.
Here.
Councilmember Whalen.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Oriel.
Here.
Mayor Renagi.
Here. And then Councilmember Kemp is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good afternoon. We're here on the budget. This is a special meeting, so there's no public comment on non-agenda items. But we are gonna start with our budget workshop. And so I think what I'm going to suggest, unless any of my colleagues disagree, is that we have our staff presentation, opportunity for the council to ask questions, and then public comment, and then we can provide feedback from there if that sounds good to everyone. And again, there will be another first reading and second reading of the budget that'll happen. So this is more about, council giving feedback and hearing from the public. So let's, City Manager, do you want to kick us off with the budget presentation?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members, and members of the public. I'm going to be joined by Assistant City Manager Gavin Curran and Tom Perez, City Engineer, and as backup, Mark McAvoy, Public Works Director, and Shannon Espinoza with our budget leads. We appreciate all of their work here. I appreciate all of their work. So why don't we go through start the presentation. I'm going to take some slides. Gavin's going to take some. Tom's going to take some. I don't usually like to talk this much, so we're trying to break it up in little chunks, but it's probably about a 34, 35-minute presentation, and maybe we'll try to go a little bit faster. Next slide. So starting with the overview, next slide. So the proposed budget is required to be presented to you by May 1st. So I really appreciate Finance's work, especially Shannon's. This was done without a director. We all miss Erica. But I really appreciate the hard work that Shannon put into this along with Gavin's help. It does need refinement between now and adoption. We were all looking through the document and noting a lot of different areas that need some threads that need resolving. There's nothing major, but there's enough important things in there that Bob's already caught some of them. I know some of you will catch others of them. And there are more adjustments to programs pending, which we can discuss kind of at the end. But this is the council's and the community's chance to ask questions and ask for more research to redirect or reinforce before adoption on June 24th. So next slide, please. It is a $161 million proposed budget. That's operating capital, all funds. The general fund portion is $95 million. And with $97 million in expenditures. So that means we're reallocating some funds to meet those expenditures. It is a balanced budget, but it does use $2.3 million in transfers from the CIP and parking funds. Top three revenue sources, again, for the public's edification, remember that's property tax, TOT, and sales tax. The capital improvement program will be $28 million in terms of projects that are starting and underway in this coming fiscal year, 25-26. And then the general fund reserves are fully funded. We did not dip into reserves to accomplish this budget. It also includes the 20% general fund reserve and then a $7.2 million disaster reserve. Next slide, please. Here's what I think seems to be going well. Again, we were able to balance this budget. We fully funded the reserves. The rest conservative, the revenue estimates are conservative. We're trying to avoid overcommitting to programs and expenditures. They're not extremely conservative. They would be modestly conservative. We are proposing some strategic staffing, holding some vacancies and some phased hiring until after October 1st to kind of see what this quarter that we're in is looking like, and certainly the first quarter of the fiscal year, which is the third quarter of the calendar year. We all know there's much volatility in the national and local national economy that's trickling down to the state and local economy. We did propose a reduction in CIP, although you'll find that we've got a lot going with the CIP. So we're not neglecting anything, at least in my mind. And we are trying to focus on and investing in efficiency. We're talking about new performance metrics this year. Another efficient thing that I think we've done is to bring on, you've done, is to bring on the in-house legal team led by Megan. Next slide. As noted, the notable additions include the in-house attorney, city attorney model. We did add positions. I don't like to always add positions, but I'll talk about those and say why I think they're necessary. They're offset by savings, and also we'll be working through the year, and I appreciate your patience with that, to slowly transition. I think governments need to slowly transition rather than abruptly transition. I think abrupt transitions just get us into trouble, but slower, more thoughtful transitions can occur. We did allocate a good chunk of money. It's not enough, but it's about $4 million to wildfire mitigation. We've done a solid investment in IT. And as the community and council are aware, we've expanded our on-demand transit and trolley services citywide, and that's partially but not wholly funded by an OCTA grant. Next slide. Key challenges, there is structural pressure on the general fund. I would love to see TOT and sales tax increasing to the extent that property taxes are increasing, but we don't think that's occurring right now. So we're fairly flat in those latter two, sales and TOT. They are dependent on a stable and non-volatile economy. We are still seeing rising labor and operating costs due to supply chain limitations and inflation, and our own MOUs for labor. Those are the labor agreements, to not use acronyms. I did propose with the team a tiered response if revenue weakens further, and that would be judged after the first quarter of the fiscal year. In addition to the vacancy holds, we would start to look at some of our contracts and potentially ratchet back services where we can. We can talk about those to the extent you'd like to. Another key challenge you folks at the council are seeing a significant subsidy to the transit fund. I don't think that $6 million subsidy is sustainable. And that's certainly not traditional for what Laguna has sent from especially the parking fund to the transit fund. That's a lot of money. Next slide. Things to be mindful, volatility. We're relying on a one-time transfer. The unfunded pension liability is always frightening. It's rising a lot. Even though we have a lot of Pepper employees, we're now a majority, sorry, I'm using acronyms, a majority post 2013 employment base, meaning after the Pension Reform Act of 2013, whereby more of our employees are in a tier system that's less expensive, and those employees pay more for their pensions than the classic tier. So, but anytime you have the kind of volatility in the stock market, obviously, that we've had, even though it's catching up to the first part of this year now, you impact pension rates, and CalPERS comes to us asking for more contributions. We talked about the CIP. We don't want to keep it's not underfunding, but we don't want to keep funding it at the level that I'm proposing this 1 year. We do have a wastewater master plan pending in Public Works, as well as wastewater rate adjustments. Those could be coming to you later this calendar year. We'll talk about a parking rate increase. Remember, we're at the 5th year of our parking rates set by the Coastal Commission through a coastal development permit. That's an important thing, that we continue to be able to maximize the opportunities that parking brings to the community and to the city's revenue, including different ways of making sure we're enforcing parking correctly, we're levying the right rates, and we're making maximum use of spaces and lots. I mentioned the tiered risk strategy. And then another, I think, thing that we can talk about, arguably, if we have a simpler plan check process through design review improvements, we can start to lessen that subsidy at which the general fund contributes to offset fees paid for residential and commercial modifications to those properties, zoning plan check, for instance. Next slide. I mentioned the tiered approach. We're in tier one. It's kind of, I'm preparing for the year cautiously, meaning holding vacancies. So again, I do have some vacancies in the budget that I'm not authorized, I haven't authorized the department directors to hire. We would slowly roll in the new hires until at least October 1st. There's some exceptions to that. The park rangers that I'm proposing, as well as Megan's team. Megan's team is on board. We're not limiting them. If we fall into tier two with more revenue restrictions, we can take a look at our contracts. We can delay some consulting activities. We can consider an incentive to certain positions to leave our own workforce. And then more significant retrenchment, we would start to defer capital projects and then reassess our operations. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand this over to Gavin to talk a little bit more about the numbers.
Good afternoon, City Council. Gavin Curran, Assistant City Manager. I'm just going to get into some of the numbers and just show you how that kind of is impacting what Dave talked about, how that's impacting your numbers. This first slide really is kind of an overview, was added to the general fund. I won't go into it in any detail. Dave kind of highlighted that already in his presentation. So this next slide, we'll see a couple of these is kind of number heavy, but this first one is your 25-26 proposed budget revenues by major fund. And so if you look to your left of the table and move towards your right, your major funds are your general fund, your Measure LL, capital improvement, your parking fund, gas tax, street lighting, utility, and transit. And kind of what you see on this table is your actuals for last year, 23-24, what we adopted for last year, the revenues for 24-25 are actually this year, what your year-end estimate is, and that's kind of always changing as you work through these, and then what we are proposing for 25-26. And then you kind of see the change in dollars from the year-end estimate to what we're proposing, and then you get those in percentages, both on the estimate and what we adopted. And I think the important thing here on this table is really to look at that far left, those percentages, the change from the adopted. So on the revenue side, I think I will talk about a little bit is, as Dave mentioned, property taxes are doing well. And so you see the general fund revenues from what we adopted last year to this year are going up about 1%. You always like to see that to be more, but it increases good. Property taxes up, but you'll see we have some impacts to both our TOT and sales tax based on what we estimated last year. And you can see that as we move down. So the Measure LL, the adopted is down about 8%. That's your TOT. We kind of overestimated last year. We're correcting that this year. Capital improvement, the same thing. We kind of overestimated our TOT last year, correction this year. The parking fund, a positive 4%, and you'll see we get that 10% increase in the parking rates in the downtown for the summer this next year, kind of the last one. But it's kind of that off year of our shopper's permit. So you get that year off from that extra $1 million that comes in every other year. Gas taxes up 2%, street lighting utility, mostly funded through property tax, up 11%. And then transit, a good thing, up 15%. Those are all your grants programs, things that are coming in from OCTA helping to fund the program. But overall, over 1% increase in revenues for these major funds. So the next slide kind of goes now to the expenditure side of things. Same thing, you get the general fund, you get the actuals from last year, you get the adopted, the proposed, and then the dollar change. And then these are all those major funds. But again, the focus is kind of on that last column there. You're starting to see the general fund, a 3% increase in expenditures. You can see where we had a 1% increase in revenues, a 3% increase in expenditures. It's where you need that kind of transfer in from that CIP, the capital improvement fund, to kind of make that work. Measure LL up a little bit, 5%, kind of your inflation, costs of labor is going up. Capital improvement, that's that spending. So now we're transferring money in. So you see a drop in what we are proposing for next year compared to the prior year. So that's that 20%. You're using that money going toward the general fund. Parking's up 9%, gas tax down 24%, street lighting utility down 17%. Those are all, and Tom will talk about these, those are all kind of related to shifts in the capital program. So if you do more, those percentages will go up. If you actually do less compared to the prior year on capital, they may go down, and those kind of swing. That's normal to see that swing in those particular, especially when it comes to capital improvement programs in those funds. And the transit fund, I think the biggest thing here is you see that 42% increase, because you can, so that number is really, of that 2.6, around 2 million or a little more than that is for the contract services for your drivers. So you can see a significant increase in those costs going up 42. And again, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, The backfill for the transit fund is if you don't get grants or other programs is from the parking fund. So there's a significant impact, and Dave kind of mentioned it in his presentation on the parking fund. So Dave mentioned this, again, the reserves, 20% in the general fund, other 7.5% or 7.2 million of the disaster contingency. I think the takeaway here is you've got 27.5% reserves, which is a pretty good number, just for any significant event that may happen within the city, financial or other, emergency or disaster. So that's a good thing. And then we're going to get into a little bit of the revenues by category for the general fund. Again, kind of a very similar table. As Dave mentioned, you've got your major revenues, your property tax, sales tax, and TOT. And I'm going to talk about those in a little bit, in a couple of those slides coming back. Community development fees, marketing and tourism district, and then other general fund revenues. And again, you see your actuals for 23, 24, and you move across. It's adopted, the current estimate, proposed budget for next year, and kind of the changes. And again, I would really look toward those last two percentage columns. So for example, in property tax, we're projecting a 4.2% increase. So it's a 4.2 or where it says 4%, that's really a 4.2. It's kind of a little rounded there, but up from what we estimate for this year. But it's really a 7% increase from what we actually assumed in the budget for last year, the estimate for last year. So a very positive thing. Sales tax, we're kind of projecting a 1.5. Laguna is kind of a 1.5 to 3% normal sales tax growth city. So we're obviously a little more on the conservative side, but 1.5%. But you can see we kind of overestimated quite a bit. And you'll see as I get to some later tables how that is, but an 8% decrease from what we estimated last year. TOT again, it says a 30%, for example, increase over the estimate. Our estimates are still low. We put a note there. Obviously, we have a lot of rooms offline due to remodeling. For next year, we're kind of assuming all those rooms come back online. So that 30% growth is really not 30%. If you assume it's the estimate's 1.5%, but it's 1.5% above what we think if we had all the rooms available. And I know that's kind of probably talking a little bit complicated. It'll come a little clearer as we get to the next table, but it's a 9% drop of what we estimated last year. So you can see that the property tax is kind of helping us cover those drops in our sales tax and our TOT. Community development fees, we're still seeing some improvements in there, so an 8% growth there. The marketing tourism, again, that's a TOT related issue, so you can see the drops. It's a 1.5% increase what we think the TOT should be for next year, and then 18% drop what we estimated. So you can see the impact some of those closures had. And then other revenue, it's a 32% change on estimate, a 4% growth or negative 4% growth. But those things are a lot of in that other general fund revenues, kind of one-time revenues, grants, other programs. So you may get them in one year, you may not get them the next year. So it's pretty normal to see kind of those fluctuations in that particular category. So now I'm going to walk through the major revenues for the general fund. So property tax here, I think if you look at these, you'll see years, you'll see what the growth was in our secured, you'll see the actual dollars in property taxes, and then just the table on the right is really kind of more a graphical version of what those numbers are on the table on the left. I think the real takeaway here is you've had, on average, about 5.8% increase in property tax growth over the last, say, 8 years, looks on the table. So that's actually a very positive thing, good growth in property tax. And you can see each 1% is about $479,000. So that 4.2 is really adding about a little over $2 million to the general fund budget. So every year, if that continues, it's a good revenue source and a very consistent revenue source for the city. So this next slide really shows TOT, sales tax, and community development fees, and it gives you the total, and total is 23.3 million. I talked a little bit about that. The estimates for next year about 1.5% growth, both in TOT and sales tax, and community development revenues about even. I think there's a couple things to take away from this chart. One is what I talked about is on the TOT, what we estimate we're going to get for, if you look at that green bar, so the TOT is that first kind of 4 bars there, but you look at the green bar, that's what we expect to get. But if all the hotel rooms were available, that number would be a lot higher. And that's that kind of shaded green. And so we're saying we're going to do 1.5% above that number for next year. But I think the also takeaway, and you'll see this in sales tax, is if you look at your 22-23 number, compare that to your 25-26, it's fairly flat. So for the last 4 years, TOT and sales tax are pretty much even. They've been flat for the last few years. So we got a lot of growth when after the post-pandemic, but that growth kind of has settled a little bit. And just as these hotels come back online, I expect things to go a little bit better, but it's kind of a wait and see as Dave approached that kind of tiered approach. Let's just wait and see what happens. But that's how we came up with our estimate for next year. It's kind of 1.5 on TOT, 1.5 above that shaded number. But the takeaway here has been fairly flat on TOT and sales tax. So next I'm going to go just some highlights from the various funds, those major funds, the other funds other than the general fund. So in the parking fund, this next year in 25, 26, you get that 10% rate increase during the summer months in the downtown. This is the last year of that, so we'll have to go back and ask for additional increases in later years. The available fund balance, the parking fund, 1.6 million. So that's a positive thing. It's been higher in past years, but still a positive thing. On the funded side, 6.7 million for parking enforcement, operations and maintenance, 3.1 million for capital improvements, and then 6.4 million in transfers. And I think the takeaway is really from this slide is really now it's a 5.3 million, but that transfer to the transit fund, it's really a large, significantly larger, 2 million or a little more than that than we've had in prior years. So it's impacting the parking fund going forward. So it can be a little difficult to sustain that kind of transfer and beyond that 25, 26 or beyond next year. And kind of the transit fund kind of shows a little bit more of that where you have your services, your Canyon trolley routes, coastal trolley routes, expanded the Summer Breeze program, expanded the on-demand services, increased trolley service during the holiday period. But you can see the operating budget now has come to about $9 million. 40% of that is funded through federal grants, state programs, OCTA. That's where that comes from. Everything else to make up the difference is all coming from the parking fund. So you can see it's kind of drawing down quite a bit more than we've seen. And as I mentioned, a lot of that is related to the last parking contract has gone up $2 million. So that now comes out of that parking fund. It has to be made up in that way. So that's kind of the takeaway from this is that significant transfer. So street lighting, utility, wastewater, all I think in positive territory. 900,000 in the street lighting fund for maintenance, 2 million we transferred to the wildfire mitigation and fire safety fund. In the wastewater, I think the takeaway, it's 6 million rate increase for next year. That's the last year of those rate increases. So the council will need to look at increasing rates going forward in 26, 27 and beyond. 16.3 million in capital, 20 million, 0.5 for the next 2 years. And of course, we use iBank loans to fund those capital projects. So gas tax, Measure L, wildfire mitigation and fire safety. So the Measure L, the takeaway, we've got 3.4 million in revenue, 3.1 million goes from public safety, and there's funding in there for those 3 firefighters. That was something the council did through the Standards of Cover program or report. South Laguna, 1.5 million in revenue, 3.3 million for marine safety costs, 1 million for public works, 165 for equipment. And I think the takeaway here on that is you're running that fund. If the council members, the County of Orange gave us $20 million, I think it's around $20 million to help fund South Laguna for a period of time. Right now, the balance in that is probably around $11 million after next year. So you've got about 3, 4, maybe 5 years to kind of find a way to help fund, make up that $3 million difference. If you take the 1.5 million, you kind of have revenue coming in and you add up the costs, you need about $3 million. You're dipping into that kind of $11 million to the tune of about 3, maybe a little over 3 million per year. So you can see it's going to start to dwindle down in 3, 4, maybe 5 years. So there's time to adjust, but it is something that's coming that needs to be kind of addressed going forward. The gas tax fund, 1.9 million for slurry seal streets improvements, and the wildfire mitigation. There's 2.5 million, 2.5 million for programs approved. There's a FEMA reimbursement in there for the Bluebird modification. There are 2 fire safety inspectors, and then of course in the proposed budget, there's one kind of a new inspector position, but it's really converting a part-time to a full-time to get you to that two fire inspector positions. And with that, I will turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, sir. So this year we took a little bit different approach to the CIP. One of the most notable changes is we went from a 10-year program to a 7-year program. So what you find as you get further out in the number of years, you're in a sense, applying numbers that will change significantly. So we brought that down to 7, more manageable, a little more accuracy to it. In addition, we wanted to really highlight the existing projects, what we call year 0 projects. And so I'll get into that a little bit, but I just wanted to get started just talking a little bit about where the funding sources are for capital projects. So the first fund being our capital improvement fund generally comes from the transient occupancy tax, so your TOT. That's the majority of that fund. It is also very flexible, and that's where you see we use that for a variety of different types of projects, whether it's a facility, could be a roadway, beach access. So that's flexible funding. Then we have the Parking Authority Fund, which is predominantly our parking fees. So those are revenues we bring in from parking fees, and we use those funds for parking and transit-oriented facilities. So improvements, for instance, to the Glen Eyrie parking structure, parking lot improvements, parking meters, things of that nature. Then we have our gas tax fund, which is really made up of our Measure M gas tax and grants. And oftentimes we supplement that with funding from our capital improvement fund. And those funds are exclusively used for street and pedestrian mobility. So with that funding, we focus on street rehab, slurry seals, and sidewalk, curb, gutter, concrete type repairs. So that is very focused in that fund. Then with our street lighting and utility fund, as Gavin mentioned earlier, those are coming from property tax revenue. And we use this funding for our street lighting infrastructure and utility undergrounding. So recent history, we've been pulling from the street lighting fund to help with the city's costs towards utility undergrounding. So that's kind of where that funding comes from. And then finally, our wastewater fund, which comes from our sewer usage charges. In addition, the iBank low interest loans. And that, again, is very focused on our wastewater facilities. So lift stations, pipelines, things of that nature. So as I mentioned, in our current year allocation, we have 82 existing projects. So if you recall, at mid-year earlier this year, we came forward. We cleared out several projects that were either complete, deemed infeasible, or otherwise determined to be closed. So we brought that number to 82, which is approximately $67.5 million allocated in various projects. Happy to announce that several of the projects in that will be completed later this calendar year. So at mid-year, again, we'll be closing more projects as they're completed. Some of the key year 0 projects, just to mention here, Fire Station 4, which we're actively working on, Cleo Street beach access, which I believe we have a bid opening tomorrow, so we'll be getting into construction soon. Anita beach access and lift station, we just awarded the construction contract, so we'll be beginning construction very soon. The enclosed lifeguard towers, that's an ongoing project we're working on. So that one you'll see in the project sheets, it's funded for the next several years, so it's an ongoing project. And then the LCR Protect and Connect project, which is, again, a multi-year project. And then our NCI Reach 5 replacement, which we are working towards getting environmental approvals and moving into construction, hopefully within the next fiscal year. So that's a brief overview of the year zero projects. We think it's important to acknowledge that those projects are there because they're actively being worked on. So oftentimes you don't see it in the years 1 through 10, although they're actively being worked on, and it is a significant amount of money in those projects. So as we look at moving into putting the CIP together and we look at project prioritization, we first focus on safety improvements. So when there's an immediate safety concern, that will automatically bring a project towards the top. And as the states, it's deemed a high priority. After that, we'll be looking for any regulatory or mandates that have come up, whether from the state or federal level. So we will move those up in the timeline as well. Grant funding, oftentimes grants come with a deadline, a hard deadline to spend the money. So again, we will focus efforts to ensure that we're not losing money. So we'll move grant-funded projects up and allocate money. Again, oftentimes grant funding requires a specific matching amount from the city. One of the big efforts we've been working on this last year especially is master plans. So we've brought several to you. We're working on the wastewater master plan, which we plan to have complete later this year. Today, we actually received proposals on our storm drain master plan. So we're actively working, and that will be used to then populate the next 7 years. And that will give us good hard data on how we can plan and move forward and make sure that we're allocating the resources appropriately. And then finally, asset condition. So this, again, factors in with the master plan. So for instance, with the facility master plan, one of the components was to do the facility condition assessments. So we're taking those, looking to ensure what we have, we can maintain and extend the life. The wastewater master plan, that's going to lay out how we best allocate our funding to ensure our lift stations are reliable and keep those going. So those are very, very important documents that we have and that we apply them correctly. So that's a snapshot on the project prioritization. The one thing I didn't put that is always in play is just council priorities. So as we go every year, we have our meetings early in the year, set priorities, and we'll reevaluate our CIP and see if there's anything we need to move around to address, ongoing issues, really what's important to the community at that snapshot in time. So in the year one allocations, and I use that word allocation. So we have a 7-year CIP. The only year where funding is allocated is year one. So years 2 through 7 are really planning. Those years are for long-term planning, but the actual allocations is year one. So in the capital improvement fund, we're looking at funding 13 projects, some of which are existing, some of which are new. So some of the key projects that I wanted to highlight there is the EOC relocation. So we're adding a supplemental funding to ensure that we get that project completed. We have a fire station communication system upgrade that will improve communication systems at all of the fire stations. Downtown action plan improvements, which is intended to fund some of the projects that were identified in the downtown action plan, and then additional funding for the Forest Promenade permanent conversion project. In the Parking Authority Fund, we have 4 projects that we're proposing to fund in year 1. That includes the parking pay station installations. So we're looking as part of that effort to remove the parking meters and replace those with pay stations. So that's something that our Transit and Community Services Department is working on. And so we collaborate on those projects. The Glen Eyrie parking structure striping. So today we have the ongoing structural improvements that are just about complete. We're planning to be done next week. Then we have this project just to do some restriping and upgrade the parking wheel stop. So that's a new project. And then the Aliso Beach parking lot, which we spoke with the council about in a study session. So we're going to be moving the improvements to Aliso Beach parking lot forward next fiscal year. With the gas tax fund, as I mentioned, these are really geared towards the slurry seal and concrete repairs. So this year we are budgeting for Zone 7. Zone 7 is in North Laguna. It's generally the area between High Drive and Emerald Bay. And then it also includes Cliff Drive, so the stretch of Cliff Drive. So we'll be working on that. The annual concrete repairs, we focus on the areas where we're going to do slurry, but it's available for repairs that need to be made citywide. In our wastewater fund, this one's exciting this coming year. We have 5 projects that we're funding, 3 of them being significant improvements to our sewer lift stations. So we have Top of the World lift station, Bluebird lift station, and Victoria 2 lift stations. So we have an item that will be coming to council shortly for Bluebird and Victoria, and surprising how old those stations are. So we're looking over 60 years for one of them and over 90 years for another. So again, looking at making some very needed improvements here, and we're ensuring that we're allocating the funding and getting these improvements done as it's funded. And then adding additional funding to the Reach 5 replacement. Again, the NCI Reach 5 is the portion of the North Coast Interceptor that goes from Coast Highway to the plant, so through the ranch in that area. So another very significant project there. With that, I'm going to turn back over.
So I'll take the next section. We're getting near the end. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Gavin. So I wanted just to frame up, not talk about a lot, but I want you to talk about it if you feel like it, council, some budget discussion items that are kind of outside the numbers, but still related. So next slide, please. First is that just what are our revenue opportunities here? If we need more revenue, we always need more revenue. And what are our expense reduction opportunities if we need to do that? So to me, the revenue side, it's expanding parking in South Laguna, especially along Coast Highway, including looking at more leased lots, potentially the Laguna Terrace lot, the Gelson's lot, just taking advantage of the demand down there. There is a lot of demand in South Laguna, across town, but South Laguna seems to be seeing the brunt of it, at least recently. Community development fees, bringing the commercial rates to 100% cost recovery, hiking the residential rates to a little bit more than we're at in the 60s and 70s. Should we go up to the higher 70s for cost recovery? Your council has talked about better short-term lodging enforcement, making sure we're collecting TOT where we need to, that we're enforcing against illegal short-term lodgings. We want to start talking with you, council, about a revenue measure for fall of 2026 and start windowing that with the community. That could be a sales tax increase. That could be something on the business license. Could be something in TOT. I'm not sure if that's the best thing given the sales tax and business license may look a little bit better in terms of measuring impacts, especially that visitors bring to the community. And something that's in the wastewater fee study is better looking at how administrative costs could be applied to a rate generation source. whether it's Megan's time or my time or Aggie's time or the finance unit's time, making sure that we're appropriately covering that. On the expense reduction side, there are always opportunities there. I think we mentioned a smarter, more efficient design review process should lead to reduced expenses there. Transit, we talked about that. There's an RFP that'll need to go out soon for our transit services, and whether we look at services in the shoulder seasons off the main summer bulk season. Fuel modification models, we need to talk about that. We need to talk about what's more expensive and what's less expensive. Contract revisions, if we need to look at scaling back some of our activities, our higher priced activities, whether that's the extensive way that we deal with security at night across our beaches. I'm not proposing we talk about that, but that's always an opportunity. And then updating how we deal with pension. Should we be taking more of our surplus funds and doing more payments earlier? I think it's always good to just to refresh what we're doing there. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through the rest of these really quickly because some of them identified already. If you want to talk about transit and Laguna Local, we can. It does have a subsidy. We've talked about that. If you want to talk about design review and community development, remember the level of design review dictates the level of staff. The level of staff dictates the level of fees that we charge. Technology, I think we need another master plan for technology. I think we're going to look at an internal services fund this year. We should be thoughtful about our technology expenditures through an approved plan. Next slide, please. I mentioned fuel mod zones effectiveness. It will get more expensive. We need to make sure it's being effective. We need to land on the right mix of site restoration methods. Your council talked about undergrounding a week ago, and how can we best support remaining residential efforts to maybe group those in larger districts, and how can the city help earlier on? And of course, how do we encourage especially Laguna Canyon Road to be undergrounded? Megan and I have talked a lot about a city charter. It could be very simple. It doesn't have to be grandiose, but we need to look at and we need to present to you ways that if it is beneficial for the city, what are those ways, and what are the kinds of efficiencies that a charter city could bring that a general law city doesn't bring? Next slide, please. Yay, someone's cheering my charter city. Or someone's getting married. I think it's a marriage. Homelessness, we're going to continue to talk with you about that. The ASL work is coming back to you soon. Thankfully, Be Well Orange County is going to be with us, thanks to Jeremy and his efforts at almost no cost to the city for another year. That's a nice change. Just flagging two things for you, the general plan and the Muni Code. We experienced this at your council meeting last week, that the safety element needed to be updated, and it needed to be updated thoughtfully. And so there are many, sorry, not many, there's a good chunk of outdated, both mandatory and optional safety elements. And we need to tackle that, general plan elements. We need to tackle that soon. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'd like to have the dialogue with you about it. Muni Code, same thing. A lot of the Muni Code hasn't been touched in decades. We should do that. That's a nice to do. It will get to be a must do eventually, but right now it's a nice to do. Next slide, please. You'll be hearing more about the FMP. You've already heard about the seismic study. We have lots of needs, but not lots of money to accomplish those needs. So we'll be focusing on prioritizing those to help address immediate facility needs, especially in the seismic realm. We always talk about parking management. What are the ways we can better enforce parking and collect some revenue there, but also make the residents happier, of course, to avoid illegal parking situations. And I talked about lots. We need to make sure our technology is better. It's moving so quickly. How can we stay on the edge of technological improvements with our parking for a better customer experience and better revenue experience? And then, as I mentioned, we're going to look at reorienting what we do, including in the city manager's office, but in other places too, other units too, as we transition through the calendar year. Next slide. Last one. I think it'd be wise for us to talk about a governance study of water and wastewater and where there are opportunities for cost sharing and service sharing. Would we create the same system that we have today if we were starting from scratch? Probably not. But, and then, so I think it's always good to look at those things. Certainly, I didn't hit everything. I know other things are on the council's mind. Next slide, please. Last one. So today's an opportunity to provide feedback on the proposed budget, and then with the intention that on June 24th, so a little bit more than a month away, we'll consider final approval of the budget with any changes that you talk about and things you want us to research. We'll approve the GAN limit for the next year. That's a spending limit. We'll reaffirm the funding resolution, receive a master fee schedule, consider any direction to staff for long-term strategic issues that we may have talked about. And then one thing I'm curious about whether the council and the city attorney and through a purchasing policy would be able to do. In some cases, we have things that are approved in the budget. Would you consider giving me the authority to approve those with your knowledge within the budget parameters rather than bringing them back as a consent item, saying, hey, I got to purchase 4 cars and you approve this in the budget. And so that's something I'd like to entertain with you. It's not a hill for me to die on, but I think some greater authority for authorized purchases in the budget may make more sense. With that, we'll conclude our presentation and welcome your comments and questions.
Thank you. And so I think what we'll do is we'll have those last slides with the specific direction that you're seeking. We'll have that frame our discussion after we hear from public comment, in addition to other comments council members have. So who wants to start with questions for staff?
I have one kind of big picture question, and that's, you talk about the need to be prepared to move into like a tier 2 or a tier 3 of cutting expenses. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about like what are the triggers for that? At what point, do we decide that we need to do more cost cutting?
I think the triggers will be the quarter that we're in right now, which is not that fiscal year, but it's the current fiscal year. What are TOT and sales tax looking like when compared to last year? And the same thing, the first quarter of the fiscal year or the third quarter of the calendar year. What is the TOT looking like? If I see it coming in as projected, I'm comfortable staying in tier 1. If I see it coming in, 5%, 7% less than for that specific quarter, I would move to tier 2.
And that would come obviously back to council and we'd
That
have
would,
a
yeah.
conversation about that.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Would it be possible for to raise the parking rates to actually cover the cost of the transit?
I think that's something we need to look at. Remember, as you know, Councilmember Orgill, Mayor Pro Tem Orgill, that the Coastal Commission looks at our program in a balanced way. They see transit as a way that provides low cost access to the beach. And we need to make sure that while you're not speaking of raising the transit rates, they don't tend to look at a way to really bring the parking rates that much higher. But I think definitely we should have this discussion with them if we're being forced to scale back transit because we don't have enough resources, could we have a larger parking subsidy of that?
And obviously, we would make the case that we have affordable options such as the
Exactly.
hospital and Act 5.
Right. And in Irvine.
In a related question to that, obviously we're subsidizing transit. We're providing a huge amount of money for our transit services, which I think is great. I love our transit options. Has that stayed relatively consistent historically?
Do you want to help answer that, Gavin, for me, or?
Yes, I think this is kind of at least from the years I've had here, this is the first year where I think obviously the contract for LAS went up quite a bit. And when you're getting into the $5 to $6 million transfer, the parking fund just can't sustain that, where we were down in previous years, 4 million, 3.5 million. It's much more sustainable. This is the first year where it kind of raised a little bit of alarms for me that, you have time to kind of address it, but it's something that kind of probably needs to be looked at for sure. So hopefully that answers the question.
Sue?
Yeah, I have a few questions. So Gavin, on the pension liability, I know we talk about this every year and every city's got this daunting pension liability, but and we looked at some different options, I think last year. I don't remember. It was last year or the year before, but we looked at some different options. Do you have any feel for what other cities are doing about their pension? Because everybody's in the same boat here.
So pensions are always is a hard thing, and the council over the years has done a lot. Meaning, they put $10 million to pay off the side fund, which Doug Hammer saved, I don't know, 10, 15, $14 million, I can't remember. Then they put another 10 million to kind of pay it down, kind of just pay it directly to CalPERS and we'll lower it. And so they've done a lot of things to help pay the pension liability. Other cities, just to give perspective, some cities, when the rates for bonds were really, really low at 2%, issued pension obligation bonds, kind of paid it off because pension obligations work when bond rates are really low, and that kind of happened after the pandemic. And then other cities put money into basically a trust fund, and then you draw down on that as your costs go up. But the biggest thing that kind of moves the needle on pensions is really the market. And to give some example of that, for the city, right now we're at 90 million in unfunded liability. At one time we were at 75, and if the council may remember, if you were on the council at the time, CalPERS came up with a 25% return. Well, that lowered our liability to around 50 million. So you can see the swings based on what the market returns do can really are the biggest impact on what our unfunded liability is and what our rates are. And so I think what you saw, what Dave talked about, who knows what the markets will do if the markets, as we were in April and we were just heading down, it's a big concern that, CalPERS is hitting those same hits, seeing those same decreases, and their returns, whatever their return is at the end of the fiscal year for them is June 30th. That's what makes your rate for, I think, 2 years ahead. So if they had lost, whatever that percentage would be, but don't make their markup, I think it's 6.25, 7%. You really get it in the rates. But to answer your question, Sue, the biggest thing, the city can do a lot, which extra contributions, we've done that, but the biggest mover is kind of the market. It really pushes those rates. And it's hard because the city put in 10 million, but I would come back every year and say, oh, you contributed $1 million, but now your unfunded liability is $2 million more, or you put in 5 million, but your unfunded liability is now 4 million more. So it's always hard for me to give the best. If I had to give a quick answer, I've kind of leaned more toward the trust fund a little bit because you can put the money aside, you can invest it the way you want. And then when you get into these troubling, maybe more difficult times, you can draw down against that to kind of soften the blow of the rate increases, because CalPERS wants to pay everything off over a 20-year term. So if you look at a kind of a curve, it goes up and then it starts to curve back down. So you just want to mitigate that higher curve. And so the trust fund kind of makes sense. You kind of control the investments. And then when you really need it, you can draw down and kind of lower the cost for the general fund at that time.
Yeah, so we're gonna have a robust discussion about this today, or should we have it at a separate meeting? I think we should have a separate discussion about the pension liability, in my personal opinion. But this is the thing that throws us all the time, is because the CalPERS, we're so dependent on the CalPERS returns, and when they're really good, then we look fine, manageable, and when they're not, nobody looks manageable. So you throw money after that. I don't know. That's the kind of the dilemma that we always go through up here. Question for Alexis, I guess. I don't know. Where are we in the grant schedule for transit? We got our grants this year from OCTA. And then what's the timing? What is the timing? I can't remember. Am I asking you a Michael Litchi question? It's too soon to ask a Michael Litchi question. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just curious if you know.
It's okay to not know.
It's okay not to know. It's okay.
Good afternoon. Alexis Braun, Interim Transit and Community Services Director. And we do file reimbursements from OCTA quarterly. And then every year, every 5 years, there's another larger grant that we had just fiscal year 24, this past fiscal year, was the most recent one, the large grant. But then we filed the reimbursements.
Okay, so we got $2 million for on demand and $5 million or something for The
Yeah,
other
it was
portion,
about-
something like that, 7
Mhm.
million or something?
Mhm.
Okay.
About.
And those are payable quarterly upon reimbursement?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're due.
Okay, so we're
quarterly
set-
reimbursement.
So the ebb and flow of the fund is pretty even. There's not like a burst of funds that come in or a dearth of funds that don't come in.
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, that's good. Thanks.
Thanks.
Next question, I think, is for Public Works. So we talked about Reach 5 for the NCI. What about 1 through 4?
So what we've done on 1 through 4, we've done several different condition assessments, and so we're looking at the various improvements we can do on those. So once we finish the Reach 5, we would be moving into the improvements on 1 through 4. So some of those include lining and adding a second pipe, so providing redundancy. But the major improvement really is Reach 5.
Okay. And so we're drawing down on our iBank loan that we got like, I don't know, 13 or 16 million dollars we did a couple of years ago.
Yes. So right now we're drawing down on the 7.5 million. So I think we just are getting ready to submit for a little over 6 million on that.
Okay, all right, good. Active CIP list that's in our, I guess it's in our budget binder. Is that the list that we recently scrubbed? It's the scrub list?
So yes, so that doesn't include the projects that were removed. So that's just active projects as of, I believe it was printed April 14th. So those 82 projects are the ones that are active. So it removed those 50 plus or minus.
Okay. I'll let somebody else ask questions. I might have a few more.
Okay. Who else has questions?
I just got a couple here before we go to public comment, but Gavin, if you look at page 9 of the presentation, I'm still struggling a little bit with the TOT calculations here, because we've got, I don't know if you can pull that up, but it's the general fund revenues by major category, the one where you highlighted in yellow. So we had, here's my question. We got TOT tax, which is the basic TOT levy. Then we've got the Measure LL, which is a 2% override. And then we've got the Laguna Beach Marketing and Tourism District, which is another 2% TOT. So they're all TOT. So if you look at page 9, we've got transient occupancy tax, the big line item, going up by 30%. And you kind of walked us through that. But then we've got the Laguna Beach Marketing and Tourism District, which is a 2% levy of TOT, going down by 18%. So they're both TOT. So I don't understand and you can look at this and get back. And then in the budget book, Measure LL is, the change versus the 24-25 estimate is down 1%. So they just all seem to be different, and they're all TOT. So I don't quite follow the math on all of it.
No, I think the estimates, I think you're right. I think I'll have to go back and I'll look at those, but I think the takeaway from the TOT is the 20 that are TOT related, which would be in your CIP fund, your Measure LL, and your general fund, are all down due to the remodelings of several hotels offline. So they all should be consistent, and I think we didn't do a good job on the estimates for this year. And I think going forward, what we tried to do on the 25-26 estimate was say, okay, if everything was open, which a lot of hotels have come back online, what would be 1.5% of that if you just assumed all of it for this year? And that's how we came to it. But to answer your question, Councilman Whalen, yes, the estimates I think are a little off. So it looks confusing because they all should be very consistent, meaning if they're all down 8, they all should be down 8. And I think we kind of didn't do a great job with the revenue estimates at that point. But I think that the real takeaway, at least we were trying to say, is we overestimated in 24, 25. We kind of heard that at the mid-year. We made a correction for 25, 26. And we were trying to make that estimate based on what we thought we would get if all the hotel rooms are open. So.
No, I understand your methodology. It's just all three of those buckets ought to be going up
They should all
for the
flow
same
together.
reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I don't want to say we kind of made a mistake on the estimates, but we probably did.
No, that's fine. I just
Yep.
wanted to get that out there, and if you can refine that in the next go around. The other second question was, I don't know how this is dealt with. If council will recall, we moved $1 million from the parking fund to the housing fund when we applied for the state matching fund grant, so for 2.5 million. And then that money was going to, if we didn't get the grant, which we still don't know yet, that money was going to revert to the parking fund from the housing fund. So I can't quite tell. And again, I'm not asking for answers immediately here. I'm just raising them and you can get back to me. But I can't quite tell how that $1 million is dealt with in fund balances, like on page 20 of the budget, which fund it's in and where it's being credited. So that would be a clarification I'd like to have. And then the next question I have, and I don't know if anybody has any good insight on this, well, anybody really. So with the wildfire mitigation, we've got the $1.1 million FEMA reimbursement that we've budgeted as estimated revenues. Any insight yet at all? Do we have any communication regarding that grant? FEMA's in turmoil, obviously, at the federal level for a variety of reasons, but do we think that's good money, or do we not know yet?
I think that's a fair question, and we made a note after you talked to me about that, Councilmember. We need to nail that down between now and adoption.
Okay.
Yeah.
Along those lines, could we maybe sometime get a list of what federal grants we have pending? So we kind of know.
Pending, paid, at risk.
Pending, paid, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We also, we were talking internally with the fire chief too. We want to better explain in the final how the fuel mod all works together, because it's kind of funded in different places and for different purposes. So I think we need an explainer on that, and can include that in the budget.
And is that related to the governor's executive order as well?
Some of it is,
Where we
yes.
might have an opportunity to go
Right.
through a less regulated process if we do it now compared to in 5.
That's right.
Okay, got it. Bob, did you have more questions?
And I think that's it for questions. Thanks.
If the
Mark?
fuel mod zone expands, which it will, let's say it doubles, does that mean it's going to double in cost?
I don't know, if Jeremy or Nico Chief King want to comment on that one?
Good afternoon, Nico King, your fire chief. We've been asking those questions, and I think that's one that's still undefined as far as the expansion of our fuel modification zones. We received direction, and we're looking into expanding some of those areas up to 300 feet. But we know 2 years from now, when a lot of the language in the executive order expires, we've asked the question, do we have to go back? Do we have to get the permits? There's language that states that we have to be compliant with what would have equated as our coastal permit. What we still don't know is, does that put us on the hook for restoration mitigation? That is a possibility, which comes at a very high price tag, as you know.
Could I quickly add to your question as well? Conservative budgeting, yes, it potentially could. If we're doubling the size, our contract is on a per acre treatment basis. So acres double cost theoretically. That's how we treat it when we make our budgets.
I do think, council members, we need to have a good discussion, as I raised on the slide, about what are our methods for fuel modification. And I think that the chief and the teams are concluding that some of the hand removals are not as effective in the long run as the methods that very selectively use herbicides. And when it comes down to, can we can we provide a safe way to do that away from people, away from animals, and on a very limited basis to make the fuel mod more effective? I think we need to talk about that and have a discussion about that.
Yeah, what's the cost differential? It's like double,
Do
right?
you feel comfortable talking about?
Yeah, we budgeted about 50% more, I believe. I would have to go back and before I speak on the exact cost, because I know we haven't spent up to 100% of what we budgeted for. But to the city manager's point, not only the cost, but you start looking at the third pass report when we finished up the season essentially last year. Some of the concerns that were raised were propagation of the invasive species. It's spreading outside of the zones. They did it mechanically, which sometimes means with the mowers, you're hitting the seed banks and it's just causing some of the invasive species to spread. So we got it accomplished as we had in years past without the use of herbicide this last year. But looking at the long term, I think we have to bring back the conversation.
And I think a key point too to the cost is to Chief's statement, third pass. Under other treatment protocols, we're generally doing 2 passes. Through mechanical treatment, we are having to do a third pass in a lot more locations, which drives up cost.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just a few questions and we'll get hear public comment. So Dave, I guess when I look at this budget, I feel overwhelmed in the sense that there's a lot of needs that we have. I think over the last 2 years since I've been on the council, we've done a lot of master plans and plans that probably have hundreds of millions of dollars in needed funds. When we think, especially when we think about the fire safety issue that we dealt with the great report that was done, and just the amount of needs, and even in a situation where we were to look at a revenue enhancement, it seems like that's we have a 100-year-old city. We have deferred investments in our infrastructure. Even with revenue enhancement in the most optimistic sense, we would still, it seems to me, need to be looking at how can we lower our long-term costs. And so I guess the first, in addition to looking at revenue opportunities and cost recovery, so the first question would be, have we when I look at the budgets for each department, so if we could have a 5% reduction in each department, hypothetically, that's around in our general fund, that's around $5 million right there, right? Because we have 9. So have we asked the departments to look for, in terms of contract savings in each of their budgets, or is that something that we would only do if we move to this category 2 or tier 2?
I often have that conversation with the department heads in terms of when a new contract comes around, the competitive bid nature of it. And I've explained to them that in my mind, tier 2 would be, we need to go back to those contractors and either again, look at the scope potentially. And remember what the big ones are. The big ones are LAS and the company also, and it's slipping my mind, that does all of a lot of our maintenance and our Spectrum. Yeah, thanks, Mark. That does a lot of our beach activities. So it would necessarily mean if they said, no, we're not changing our rate, we would go back and change the service model if we needed to. And I'm just not, I don't know, council can always offer its suggestions and direction, but I don't know that we're at that point right now where we want to ratchet back either of those things. But
so I get that, but how do we not look at policy choices related to some of the services that we provide when we look at this deferred infrastructure and public safety investments that we need to make? Because even in a hypothetical situation where we raise revenues, we're not going to be able to pay for all this under the status quo on our current trajectory. So I guess that's sort of my question is, why wouldn't we want to have those policy conversations about, okay, maybe we would rather have less trolleys during the off season, right? And we save X amount of money that could be deployed into something related to fire safety. That's a policy choice. It's not an easy choice, but that's why, the residents pay us $800 a month is to make those types of priorities, because so I guess that's kind of my high level question is, and I guess that ultimately it is a policy question for this council, but it seems, so I'm just going to leave that there.
Well, I would like to follow up because I think that's a great question, and you've characterized it just a little bit differently just a few seconds ago, and I like the way you've characterized it. It's what can we do with our new contracts or our new, remember, we're going out for RFP very soon for transit. Should we rescope it then versus rescope it now? Sorry, rescope it in advance of the new contract going out, saying this is what we want, this is what we need, this is what we can pay for, versus going back to the current vendor and saying, can you sharpen your pencil a little bit? So I would 100% respect and go down the pathway of rescoping things before we put it out to bid.
Got it.
So I
Okay.
again appreciate that perspective.
But not like, because I mean, that's part of the problem with the way government does budgets is we make an assumption that all the people before us got it right. Right. And we
No,
just
and that's true.
roll that into the budget
That's-
as opposed to stepping back and saying, doing a zero-based approach of, okay, should we be spending this amount of money on this? Right.
You're right. And
And if we had
that is
unlimited
one
amount of
way to
money,
look
it's
at it.
really
Yeah.
easy to just keep going on this trajectory, but
Yeah.
we don't, and we have needs. So it's a policy choice,
Yeah.
but
Well, and the other, it's on the flip side too. We should have spent money on something a long time ago and didn't do it. Now
Exactly.
when we need to spend it, we don't have, so, yeah.
so, and then
It's the two-sided coin.
so your current proposal does not contemplate community development fees, but you're basically teeing that question up to us.
Well, we were talking about this before the session today because it's in part my fault that I didn't understand exactly what's built in. There is no rate increase built in. I would like to build in a rate
So
increase with you.
Why, so hypothetically, couldn't we just adjust for inflation, the amount
Yes.
that the same subsidy from
Yes.
2021 or whatever the council made that decision, and how much money would that be?
And we can figure that out for you and bring that back to you. I
Okay.
don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, but it just seems like that's
Yeah.
might be a fair approach where you're keeping it literally the same subsidy.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the final question is just about the pension issue. It seems like the trade-offs between it seems like there's very little the downside of a section 115 pension trust would be that you're not, that if you have money that you want to deploy now on a capital project, you couldn't deploy it. Right. But the good thing about it is that if in, 2 years we have the money in that trust, we could just use that to pay our typical pension payment. So, and I agree with Sue that we should have a comprehensive look at this, but I don't think when you read this capital improvement program and you look at this, we're not going to be able to spend all the money that we are appropriating. So is it a fair characterization to say there's little downside in putting a healthy sum of money that we can't spend this year into something like a section 115 pension trust so that we can deal with this increase in liabilities that is going to be, I think, in the next 3 years or 2 years?
I think given the level of investment that we have, we probably could identify enough of a surplus to make a meaningful Section 115 trust.
In Newport Beach, you did the prepayment approach, right? Where
We looked at all of it though.
Okay.
Right.
So you think maybe the recommendation would be, to Sue's point, a comprehensive look at everything and give,
Yeah, because we're, right.
and what would the timing be on something like that?
I'd like to do it sooner rather than later, so not necessarily for budget adoption, but say before or right at fall, so you had a discussion there. And you could always, because these are things that you could always, again, take from the investment accounts and move towards a 115 trust.
And couldn't
and
you
amend the budget?
and couldn't you hypothetically budget in for this, and then you could say, after the budget adoption, you could give us options about
You
how
could.
we'd want to
Sure.
deploy that. Okay. I think those are my questions. So I think we have a hard stop at 6:00. So let's take 3 minutes of public comment per person on the budget and go from there, and then we'll bring it back to council for feedback. So who wants to start us off?
Matt Lawson, I just want to really commend council. I don't think I need 3 minutes for it, for dedicating and focusing on fire safety and fire prevention, because if we don't get that right, nothing else is going to matter. And I think if we can dedicate 10% of that general fund, start off with that presumption, zero base everything else, that's a very powerful tool when it comes to budgeting. And I think it's not, like anything else that's important, it's not easy, but it's something that I think we need to do. I think we all recognize the need for it. And after what we've seen in other cities, including one very close to us, I think we all understand is Councilmember Whalen put it, we have to focus on need to dos, not nice to dos. I also just want to mention one other thing, because I don't see anyone else here from the Police and Community Foundation. The foundation has, as I think most of you know, has basically raised funds for a mounted unit, which will be helpful in terms of patrolling the trails and keeping an eye on things. And that will help out to some degree in terms of fire prevention. I think it will also have tremendous help, and I'll defer to Chief Calvert and his colleagues in terms of helping them in terms of other law enforcement and public safety functions as well. And we shouldn't be bashful about asking we look at the amount of money raised for things like school power. We shouldn't be bashful about going to the community and perhaps seeking some supplementary funding, particularly neighborhood by neighborhood, for things that like undergrounding and some of the other things that would help us in terms of fire risk mitigation, because it's something we all need to do to protect our property values and our community values and everything that we care about here. So thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Gene Felder. I live at 2680 Park Avenue. I belong to a number of organizations. I'd like to address the council as an individual, however. I think I heard that if the sales tax was increased by 1% more, and this would be a ballot measure for November 2026, it would increase revenues by $7 million. That's something that would be spent or paid for by a lot of out-of-towners as well as residents, and I would like to support that. 25 years ago, I addressed the council and I suggested a blight tax. I'm still maybe the only one for it, but I think when you walk down the streets of Laguna Beach and you have empty storefronts, it's depressing. And I don't know what I've got an MBA from UCLA. I cannot figure out what a landlord is doing with an empty building. I just do not understand it. So I would think a little incentive might go a long way. In a number of things, like the parking report was the idea of a business improvement district. And certainly I think that's well overdue downtown. I think John Thomas said downtown is worth like $2 billion or something. But it could be used in other places in town where it would, beautify the area and be good for the businesses that are paying it. I voted for the sales tax increase for undergrounding on Laguna Canyon Road. I think we're talking about the portion out to Canyon Acres Drive, something like 91 utility poles. And so I've attended quite a few Protect and Connect meetings. I understand there has to be environmental documentation, certification, so that we can request grants. I'm for undergrounding, but I'd appreciate if the federal government or the state government paid for it. So let's find out if there are grants that are available. I'm on the board of the Top of the World Neighborhood Association. We're concerned about fire and crime. I don't know what progress exactly has been made on fire detecting cameras and license plate readers of cameras, but I think that kind of technology should be used. And in the homeowners insurance problem, is there any way we can become the whole city a Firewise community? That is to say, we have a fuel modification zone surrounding us. We spend a lot of money on it. Maybe we should spend twice as much money on the fuel modification zone if it would get us a Firewise community designation. And lastly, on the promenade, how much money have we already spent? And what is the total that we expect to spend on that project?
Thank you, Gene.
Hi, John Thomas, and I'm speaking on behalf of South Laguna Civic Association regarding the Aliso Beach parking lots, and we're here to try to save you a little money. We sent a letter April 8th essentially supporting alternative one, which is a rehabilitation of what is there and has served that beach well for many years, and which is a less costly alternative than the $2.2 million alternative in the proposed budget. Why is the city doing this? The city council just had a long discussion about the LBTMD and the city's efforts to de-emphasize day trippers, yet adding parking at Aliso Beach will clearly result in attracting more day trippers. The budget item is an investment in attracting day trippers. This will not generate hotel tax or other revenue for the city. The idea should be to generate revenue from the day trippers who are here and not to bring in more day trippers. The financial feasibility is poor. Budgeted at $2.2 million, the additional spaces created are estimated to generate $225,000 of additional annual revenue. We don't know where that number comes from. But the bigger problem is that the staff report estimates gross revenue. The budget reflects that parking enforcement, operations, and maintenance are costing 63% of gross revenue. So net added revenue might be only $84,000, meaning it could take 26 years to get the investment back. In addition to the operating costs that reduce net revenue, we know that the added cost to the city of providing public safety and other services to visitors is much greater than the revenue generated by visitors. And that is especially true of day trippers. This may be counterintuitive, but while this is intended to generate revenue, adding parking to Aliso Beach may in fact do the opposite and generate more costs than revenue. The public process for the decision to pursue this project was limited. There was one brief afternoon study session with little public input, and of the 3 public speakers, none recommended alternative 3 as proposed. Plus, while the staff, while the staff report said the study session was informational only, we now see the project in the proposed budget. Whatever. South Laguna Civic urges the city to table this project until there is a more robust resident involvement and until this is better sorted out. But if the city feels it has the funds for this, why not redirect the $2.2 million toward an investment that is clearly for the benefit of the residents instead of for an investment in attracting more day trippers, and use these funds to purchase the Catalina lots for a park that will help relieve the overused Village Green Park and allow separation of families with dogs from families with small children, something a number of the council members have said they would support. Thanks.
Thanks, John.
Ed Almanza. I would just like to give a shout out for a practice I think the city manager and council are beginning, which is to project out beyond a 2 to 3 year timeframe, out to 10 years, which enables you to do some advanced planning for those projects that require big budgets and complex sequences like the general plan, LCP update, visitor management, and a lot of the things that are in the general plan that remain unimplemented. I think advanced planning is a very powerful tool that is practiced a lot more by other cities. And I'm not suggesting we do a lot more studies, but think more comprehensively with the budgets that we will see in the future, and to enable that kind of strategic planning to occur through that approach rather than piecemeal planning for things like parking. That's my suggestion and compliment to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Any other speakers on this item? Okay, this is your last chance. Okay, we're going to close the public comment on the budget, and we're going to bring it back to council. So council, unless we have more questions at this point, should we start with those slides where the city manager is seeking direction? Or does anyone want to ask questions before we kind of start there? Does that work for everyone?
Just like it was an important item, which was the reference to the charter city. Can you give us a couple of examples of how that would benefit us financially?
The one I keep focusing on is parking meter enforcement. Mm-hmm. There's a general law provision that says only a city employee can put the ticket on the windshield. Yet many communities are making this much more automated. I know it's not very friendly, but I don't think we don't have the staffing to enforce the level that we would want to. So I wouldn't do a charter just for parking meter enforcement, but it's kind of a big incentive there. And Megan may have some other thoughts too.
I'll echo the parking meter enforcement. There's
Dave and I have chatted about the different, it used to be 10 years ago that a charter city had a lot more power than it does today. It still has, in certain elements, a little bit of extra contracting authority. It can have a little bit of extra personnel room. So there's little areas to fill the gaps. It's not, like I said, it's not what it once was. But still, I think to the extent that the city could realize cost savings, it's worth having a conversation with the council about whether it's worthwhile for your efforts.
So why don't we pull up slide on page 16 in our pack? I don't know what the slide number is on the PowerPoint, but where it starts at budget discussion items. Okay, so Dave, do you want to kind of walk us through each of these questions and give us the context and the specific direction that you're looking for?
Yeah, the first one, transit and Laguna Local, again, I'm not asking for a direction now. I want you to be aware of, and at any time, call up, hey, do we have the right level of operations for transit? And I think your best opportunity to do that is when we go out for the new RFP for LAS parking, for parking that LAS will likely respond to and is serving us today.
So the counter argument to that, I guess, would be they just increased the contract by $2 million. What is that based on? Cost of living or
I might have to ask Megan and Alexis to help me here.
Because it wasn't based on more service, right? It was based on
Well, we did expand their service a little bit, but I think a big component was insurance.
Yes. Okay. Alexis.
Yes, about $1 million of it, or $500 million of insurance was added, and council approved that in December of 2024. In addition, we increased the hours of the summer on-demand program by 19 hours a week for the 10-week summer program, and the expansion of the on-demand services out to the canyon, and adding the summer breeze to start on May 23rd, Memorial Day weekend this year as well. So those had cost increase, as well as just overall salaries for their contract employees. That increased by about 9%, and then an additional 6.6% or something increase. And that all added up to get to be about $2 million.
And Alexis, are there times on the trolley, because I mean, I see it anecdotally, but I don't have the data, where we are not seeing the ridership, where it's sitting empty, and hypothetically we could, reduce. There would be an impact, of course, right? Because we want as much trolley opportunities as possible. But are there opportunities if you had to cut the usage that you could find? Do you have that kind of data?
Yes, we track that all and can look at that for the off seasons to see what the numbers are, to see if there's potential cost savings.
And then when does the RFP go out on both the trolley and on demand, or are they set? Because the on demand I know is going out. Is the trolley going out for an RFP?
They're related to the contract services.
It's the same contract.
That'll be going out. That'll go to you guys in early fall
Early fall of this year.
of 2025.
Okay.
Got it.
The thing is though with, and I think this is not sustainable, the cost, but one thing on the flip side, it does help us with congestion in the town. I mean, with lack of cars circulating all the time. And it does help us with parking.
Well, I
So-
think
Includes
Dave's
coastal.
right. I think when you go out, and you could bid some alternatives, right, in the RFP with levels of service and eliminating certain off-season or weekday stuff, and, then see how you want to build your budget. We've always subsidized the transit. It's not going to go to zero, but 5.4 million is a big, big jump from where it was. But, I think as long as I can remember, we've always done a couple million plus a year. I mean, you could look at things too, like, we all do Uber and Lyft, right? And would $5 a ride for Laguna Beach Local be too much? And maybe exempt the kids under 18 or something, but there were 75,000 boardings last year. So, I mean, you could start to collect some revenue. So maybe that's something that should be looked at in the RFP process too.
We charge if we're getting grants though?
We have to look at that. I'd also be curious if someone could buy like a subscription and you could have a quarter's worth or 2 quarters worth of the rides.
And looking into other cities, just doing very basic research, it looks like some of the other cities are grant funded, as well as they charge a very minimal fee. doesn't cover the cost by any means, but it, it does subsidize it a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's what we should look at in the future for the on-demand.
So I feel like that's good direction. The next item, sorry, were you going to speak, Mr. Mayor? Pro
If
Tem?
we lowered the level of service on the trolley, for instance, would that affect Coastal's, opinion or decision on our ability to raise rates?
I think we have to have a discussion about when that would occur and whether it's, I think it probably would if we were lowering the level of service during the high use times, high impact times, probably much less so if we were lowering that use when, in the shoulder seasons, when people can get a parking spot.
Yeah.
Well, for example, they approved our last rate increase before we had those 3 service level expansions that Alexis just mentioned. So, I mean, you can, there is a basic level they're looking for, though.
They're very much in favor of our transit plan. We've talked to them about it. They like it.
So it sounds like there's support for just keeping it as is until we look at the RFP.
So you'd look at it in the fall and we'd have a good
Yeah.
dialogue at that point. Yeah.
Okay.
The next item, I'm just going forward on the basis that we should be bringing up the fees potentially by CPI. We'll probably serve it up to you a couple different options, maybe by 10% on residential, maybe to 100% on commercial. And give you some options there. And that would come between now and the 24th of June.
I think that sounds good to everyone. I think that.
Did you, in Newport, did you do 100% cost recovery?
I was reminded by the gentleman that's helping us out here that who worked with us in Newport that you never do total 100% cost recovery because you have an advanced planning component. So you can't cover that way. But
I thought in Newport, though, you apply an advanced planning fee. So you say we're going to do a 5% advanced planning fee on top of this.
that may have happened after 11.
That's what I thought anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're good on DR and cost recovery there. And then at some point, once we can change the, update our design review process, we could do another study.
Right.
Got it.
Technology, that was more informational that we're going to be working on a master plan through Jeremy's team and come back to you with an ISF, Internal Services Fund, certainly not within this budget period, but for the next budget period. Next slide. We had the fuel mod discussion. We need to come back with you with options that will come back. Probably, I'm going to think out loud with you. When Chief King mentioned bids, we probably present those bids with you because the bids have different amounts based on the type of fuel mod, whether they're using an herbicide or not. We'll look forward to that discussion.
Yeah, I think on the fuel mod too, and the wildfire mitigation and fire safety report still needs further work, as we noted when we adopted it right on budget items. There is a one-time opportunity, and Chief King touched on it, and Jeremy touched on it. There's really just a one-time opportunity under this governor's executive order to look at expanding areas. I just feel like we need to identify more funds for that. I believe you have to initiate it this year, but I think you can commence construction by October of next year.
26.
So some of it could slide into the next fiscal year, but with this one-time opportunity, I think we need to figure out how to have some more money or just come back to us and convince us that there's enough money to take advantage of this one-time opportunity. I'll put it that way.
I think that's a really good point because one of my concerns is this one-time opportunity will result in increased maintenance needs, right? I think effective fuel modification is made and broken in long-term maintenance. So as we think about expanding the zones, we need to be cognizant that that is going to be an ongoing cost and an important one, I think.
So I think the direction, Bob, that you're putting forward is to identify how much money we would need to fully take advantage based on off the regulatory requirements of the executive order and make sure that we have that appropriated. I would support that. And it sounds like, is there anyone against that? I think we have support up here for that. So Dave, if you want to make sure that I don't know if we can identify those funds ahead of the budget, but adoption.
We can come pretty close to identifying as
Good.
that amount. And just as a note for everybody, the chief noted to you guys, he has a community wildfire assistance grant that is going to help us look at the key areas that may need to be added and apply some science to this decision. And that'll be fairly quick.
Good. Okay.
On the undergrounding effort, I know I'll maybe refer to Councilmember Whalen. We have, as a staff, looked at a mapping scheme of how to underground the remaining residential areas in the city. And the question is, should we start to surface that and get people aware of it? We're not forcing it down anyone's throat, but I think there are economies of scale in doing it that way.
I'm supportive of that.
Yeah, I think we should. I mean, Sue and I met with Dave and Tom and Pierre, and Public Works did a good job of mapping out basically 5 remaining areas that, you know, would take care of the balance of the city. And I think we haven't refined the process or the recommendation completely yet, but the idea would be to take more of the uncertainty out of the process and get further along, you know, before people cast their votes. And this would probably require the city to advance the planning and design costs before, and then bid it before you get to a vote. Because people are always saying, well, you told me 3 years ago it was going to be 40,000, now it's 80,000, and I'm opposed to it. So anyway, I think we're going to bring it back. The other complication there, just real quickly, and Megan, I think we were going to bring it back on the 20th, is 3 of the 5 areas have got private streets and there's easement issues. And we need to have our city attorney work with the utilities to figure out the details of how we get those easements in hand. So I think that's what's coming back first, right?
We have a consent item for that next week, actually, and it'll just seek authority to sort of negotiate and offer what we can to the utilities to help address some of the trickier issues we have with private roads primarily.
Good. And I think as part of that, with the what we did with expanding the criteria for the deferment program, I think is just a win-win for everyone involved, because it allows people who are lower income and might not be able to. So if we can look at opportunities to expand that, I think that's a winner for the city as we look at more undergrounding.
We'll do that.
Yeah, good.
On the next one, Megan and I would like to come back to you with kind of a charter 101 and whether or not you want to pursue that further. We have time on that, not a lot of time, but it would be something that the voters would have to look at either in June of 26 or November of 26.
Got it. Okay. So I think the question before us is, do we want that analysis?
Right.
And
is that okay? If
my
we work
answer
on
would
that?
be yes. I don't know how my colleagues think. I'm seeing nods for options. Okay, good. So it sounds like there's consensus there.
Next slide. Homelessness, that again, mostly informational. We're working on bringing back what you last directed us the night we talked about the alternative sleeping location. That's coming up. The general plan.
Bob, do you want to
Dave,
say
before you
something?
leave that, I was just, reading in the paper today about, Newsom putting out $2.5 billion for homelessness. And, we know the county's got funds. I just want to make sure that as we look at this, and, Jeremy did a great job with negotiating the Be Well contract, but that we are, getting our oar in the water wherever we can for grant money for homelessness. I don't think we've really gotten much over the years. The county's given us some, community development block grant stuff, but not, and I don't think we've gotten any state money, so.
I personally don't think the county's doing anything on this that's substantial, because they have every city going on their own. It's just gotten really old. I mean, what's this costing us, like $1 million a year?
500, but.
No, it's more than that. We have the day program too.
Oh,
I mean,
right.
So, it's they need to get a comprehensive.
The county, to their credit, they did reach out when you had that dialogue to say, how can we help more? So I'm going to take them up on that. Yeah. The next one about the general plan, I don't know where this fits into everything. I just wanted to raise it. So I think that's a conversation Megan and I will have to continue to have as to when we could work on this and what the budget might be. And is there a phase 1 just to examine what we're not doing and need to do first? And maybe that's what we bring back to you.
Well, go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say, could we just start with a real simple matrix of
Yeah.
general plan elements, last updated
Yeah.
Mandatory, optional.
non-mandatory.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be good.
Does that sound like a plan?
I think so. And I like Ed's idea about, at some point we probably should have an advanced planning division at the city where you have, one or two people in the planning department whose job is just to be looking at these high level issues so we can really comprehensively plan the
I think
city.
The community development team would love that.
Yeah,
Yeah, rather than working on residential projects.
exactly. Okay, good. So we're good on the general plan, Muni code. I think, David, I feel like there's so many opportunities here that could save money over time. Like we think about the RPR issue, where once that, and I don't remember Matt Schneider would know the exact date, but now that that's going to move away, that's going to free up staff time to work on other things. And so it seems like, even though it sort of feels like something where it's like, oh, there's other things that we'd want to do before looking at the comprehensive update to the code. I wonder if we could prioritize items that, for example, if you want to go and do a trash pickup, you have to get a permit through the city. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
What kind of trash pickup?
If you want to go and pick up, organize a beach
cleanup.
cleanup, you have to get a permit. Maybe there's a reason for that. I don't know, but it just seems like there's so many rules that we have and not all of them make a lot of sense, but those rules take a lot of time from our staff.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't, so I guess I am supportive of a comprehensive update to our code, but maybe we could prioritize things that staff identify and the public identify as unnecessary and because there's a lot of rules make sense, right? Like our 36-foot height limit makes a lot of sense for the character of our community, but there's a lot of rules that we have that just are, excessive, very burdensome. So I don't know, Dave, what do you think about that from a staff
I'll talk to the
perspective?
management team about that to see could we have it, like you're saying, a community solicitation of
Yeah,
what out
maybe
there
we
looks
just
crazy.
put out an online form and say, what are some ideas of,
Right.
unnecessary rules that we have?
And I know the management team will have some ideas on that too.
Yeah, because we shouldn't just be
Follow.
blindly doing things because a rule was set
Right.
50 years ago and it makes no sense today.
Right.
So I don't know, do you need,
I don't think I need more direction on
okay.
that. Next slide. We will be bringing the FMP back next meeting, 2 meetings. Yeah, we'll
Late June.
late June. So second meeting in June is coming back to you. Parking management, we've talked about that a little bit. We talked about how the charter relates. We have an RFP coming back to you for a different type of technology, and I think that's the best format, as well as you'll also see our application for rate increases and space additions. And that would be coming up, I think, this summer. So I don't know that I need further direction. It's more informational.
What about the parking meters in South Laguna? Someone asked me about that this weekend.
We were just talking about that in terms of what that takes. And I think we need to look at whether or not we can issue ourselves a coastal development permit to do that, just to add spaces under the current rates. And we mean pay stations. And then we will need Caltrans's permission, at least on Coast Highway. So we were going to examine that, and I was going to come back to you with a report on that fairly soon, because I don't want to, we're leaving money on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One smaller item, we'd also talked about, I don't think it's going to happen now, or maybe it is, but demolishing the dentist building and adding parking over the summer in that lot there, or at least utilizing the existing spaces in that lot as public parking. I don't know where we are with that.
Is our permit before the planning commission on the 21st? Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Could we put some, I mentioned this to you earlier today, could we put some portable toilets on that property while we're waiting for all this? So we could use it for beachgoers?
You take a look at that and have a conversation with our neighbors.
They had this, I forget what city it was, that was
Yeah.
using there's a company that's called, I don't know, has some kind of
super toilets or something.
Long Beach called Thrones or something.
Thrones. It's called Thrones, and they're pretty nice. They bring them in, they take care of them and stuff.
Yeah.
It'd be a good idea. Dave and I were talking about where could we put these around town for the summer or something.
That reminds me of, I think it was John Thomas's comment. We do have a Aliso Beach parking lot meeting coming up, I think, on Thursday. If anyone wants to join that, reach out to Tom Perez. It's online, right? We're going to talk about what we've learned. I don't need any further guidance about I'm just letting you know we're going to reorient things as things move. I'm going to try to have a little bit more focus economic development department in the using existing staff in the CM's office, the comms position. I'm not filling one of the comms positions, so that's just when there's more and other there, so I can be vague. Next slide. I think this is the last one. I've been talking about with Alex actually about should we do a governance study? We've kind of teed that up. I know we've talked to Keith a little bit at the Water District, whether or not that's something you're okay with us pursuing.
I'm supportive of that.
What does it mean?
It means looking at if you were starting this whole structure, it means two things. If you were looking at this structure from scratch, how would you build it? And it also means, and that's the governance side. The other side is now that we have what we have, what are opportunities for cost sharing potentially, whether that be human resources or finance or functions like that. And not that we always would have willing partners, but our fleet and fleet administration, those kinds of things.
Well, and you're going to address with the rate study, but right now we're essentially the general fund is subsidizing the sewer fund. And so
If we're not appropriately
that's sort of
covering our admin
the
costs,
short-term costs
Yeah.
recovery issue, but then there's a longer-term issue of could we be saving a lot more money that the ratepayers could ultimately, save if we had looked at the way we do water, sewer, and then, interacting
Right.
with that. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's something that we need to, at least to look at some options. Is there consensus on doing that analysis? Okay.
Okay.
Good.
I think
How's that going to be done internally?
With a consultant, probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because staff's got a lot going
Yeah.
on already.
Yeah.
More immediate.
I didn't put up there, I purposely left this off the discussion of the elected city treasurer because Laura is off on a travel wedding, a family wedding. So, but I did want to have that conversation when Laura is in the room as to what you folks have directed me to do with Ralph Tellis to make a recommendation as to the jurisdictional responsibility of the elected city treasurer
When does that come back?
before the 24th. So we only have 2 meetings left.
So, okay.
I want to make sure I have Laura fully briefed on that. Yeah,
Good.
that's all. Unless I missed something.
Okay. Does anyone want to start with, so we have to go to a public hearing on another item, but does anyone want to start off with comments or other ideas or suggestions at this point?
Well, just a couple and Dave, you had a good slide in there on revenue enhancements, and Mark Orgel and I are the subcommittee on that. I appreciate Gene Felder's support for a sales tax increase. We are looking at that among other options, and but could we? 2 things. One, I don't know if it'll come back with budget, but we talked about the 5-year projections, right? Long range projections, because I'd like to see some projections on revenue enhancements for increased community development fees, parking rate increase. We're making some assumptions, I realize, but increased enforcement, full cost recovery from wastewater was another one we talked about, to see what those can generate, at least in the out years. And then, another thing I'd like staff to think about is, we carry these over every year. I'm looking at the beginning and ending fund balances on page 20. They're not big amounts, but we've got, parking in lieu, park in lieu, art in lieu, drainage. Those monies just always seem to sit there. Drainage, for example, I would assume we could use in CIP somewhere. It's only $84,000, but we ought to think about, is there anything we should be doing with those monies rather than just letting them sit there? And then on housing, the other thing that's on my mind there is, you mentioned bringing back the budget resolution, but what we've done in the past is, last couple of years, it's not a long time, but Gavin, check me on this, but I think if the property tax comes in July with the actuals being above the projections. So we're currently projecting 4.2. If it came in at 5, for example, the current budget rules put up to $500,000, I think it is, in a housing fund. So I don't know, is that, when you talk about budget resolution, is that going to be part of what comes back on the 24th?
Yes, that's
Or is-
part of that budget resolution. Is reaffirming that transfer and that, how we do that. The council reaffirming
So
that.
we're not recommending a change to it, or staff isn't currently anticipating that, or?
No, we bring, yeah, that budget resolution includes a number of things. It's it's that transfer, it's the mid-year transfer to have $300,000 to open space if there's mid-year savings, and a couple of other things. I think we go into the requirements for the disaster contingency fund, which is if you borrow from that, you need to repay it back in 3 years, things like that. The council just reaffirms those every year as part of the budget. If there needs to be changes, we can do that in the resolution.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I was gonna,
Dave?
oh, sorry. Go
Excuse
ahead.
me. Following up on Bob's CIP question, there was, I believe it was 1.9 million, 1.8 million in the street light enhancement. Were you able to find out if that was something that
We
we
didn't
could?
prep you guys for that. You know, you got 1.9 million, I think, in some carryover for Coast Highway Street Light. Is that?
Yes, I believe the ornamental streetlights.
Yeah,
Coast
that's the one.
Highway ornamental streetlights.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that project was intended to change the streetlights along Coast Highway to the ornamental type. And what we have been doing is holding that money because the plan is to make that change when Edison constructs their Route 20A. So we would need to be doing work to the streetlight system as part of that project anyway. So we're holding that money to do the new lights with the project.
Dave, I was just going to mention too that it's not going to be popular with the fire department, but I think we should put this rehabilitation on that old fire truck on hold. I mean, we don't really need, there hasn't been any significant public funds, raised, and we were supposed to do cost sharing and stuff. So can we just wait until, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to do that. There's nothing to be gained from that right now.
I think Andrew Hill already has it out being renovated, so I think the money we appropriated last year is,
Well, it's sitting back behind the Suzuki with a tarp on it, or not the Suzuki, the rec center with a tarp over it. So
maybe he just contracted for it, but
We'll
we should check on
find
that.
it. We could bring that back to you as just an informational item as to where that is.
Holly? You're good? Bob, anything else, Bob, or good? Mark, good? I'm just gonna say, 3 things. One is I appreciate all the work that went into this. I mean, I think, I don't know that there's support for this, but I think we should pretend like we're in tier 2 and look at how we can at least give us options of things that could be reduced. Because I don't see how, even if we were to do all the cost recovery issues and look at revenue enhancements, I don't see how we deal with our long-term obligations in terms of both pension and just infrastructure. I think infrastructure is the bigger one. So I guess, maybe if there could be some thought into low-hanging fruit ideas, but I just think this idea that we're going to keep the same services without any thought to it doesn't make sense given the needs. Number 2, and I think there's support for this, but I just want to confirm, I would support coming back with a comprehensive analysis on, pension options to the point that Councilmember Kempf made. So is there consensus on looking at options for that and the trade-offs involved with exit? And then number 3, I really appreciate the metrics in this budget. I think what I would like to see is at some point the council should get involved in really refining these metrics, working with the department heads, because what we really want these metrics to be is about what are, this is our policymaking document. So how do we make these metrics the most, effective form of measuring what we're looking for out of each of the departments. So it's not something that we need to do from the dais today, but at some point I think it'd be helpful if we could have some dialogue about the metrics, and maybe it could be back in different departments coming forward and presenting them. But I think that's an opportunity in the future, but I don't have anything right now.
I think we need to be a little careful of that, just because I think our focus should be on Dave's metrics and, what we need the city manager to accomplish and how those funnel down to the different departments. So I think there's a way to do it, but I want to be cautious.
But I think, so like department metrics, for example, there's a policy choice. Do we want to have 100,000 people ride the trolley or 80,000, right? And how much? So I do think that it is within the budget purview of the city council. And this is ultimately, the document that so I do think it's within our role, but I appreciate what you're saying.
I think there's a way to do it wisely and reasonably.
Yeah. So that's all I have. So anything else?
I'd just like to thank you for the conversation, thank the public, and thank especially the team that works the hardest on the budget to pull it together, especially Shannon and Gavin. Again, with no finance director right now, it really fell on Shannon to pull all this together with Gavin's help. So I just really appreciate you guys. Thank you. And to the departments too, who fed into that. I know it wasn't easy, so appreciate the time.
Good. Thanks, everyone. Okay,
We have
so
one more agenda.
one more item. This is a public hearing. So we are going to do a public hearing pursuant to AB 2561 related to city staff vacancies, recruitment and retention efforts. I'm going to open the public hearing on this item, and we're going to have a brief presentation from Aggie.
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. Aggie Nesh, Director of Human Resources and Risk Management. I'm joined tonight by Robina Aurora, one of our senior human resources analysts, who's also the lead recruiter for the city, and she'll be presenting on this item.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Robina Aurora. I'm the Senior Human Resource Analyst. Today, I'll be reporting on the city's workforce vacancies, as well as the recruitment and retention efforts. AB 2561 went into effect January 1st, 2025, and it provides transparency and ensures appropriate staffing. It requires cities to present annually prior to the adoption of the final budget the status of vacancies for full-time represented positions, recruitment and retention efforts, and any obstacles in the hiring process. As required by law, the city invited employee organizations to speak on this item. No responses were received.
That looks like we have none here tonight.
Okay. We're happy to share that our vacancy rate for the calendar year of 2024 citywide average is 8%. Please note that this is not our current vacancy rate. This is over the full calendar year of 2024 and not at one point of time. Our current year-to-date citywide average is 5%. These vacancy rates are a result of internal movement, retirements, resignations, and newly budgeted positions. As an example, the Police Employees Association had a total of about 10% vacancy rate in the calendar year of 2024. Their current vacancy rate as of today is 4%. Fire Association had a total of about 8% vacancy rate in the calendar year of 2024. The current vacancy rate is at 0%. And the Municipal Employee Association had a total of about 7% vacancy rate in the calendar year of 2024. The current vacancy rate is at 6%. This is due to the new positions, internal movement, retirements, and resignations. Overall, we would consider our rates as normal within Orange County. 5 to 10% is an average place to be as a result of internal movement, retirements, resignations, and newly budgeted positions. We are always proactively working on reducing vacancies. If at any point we fall between the 10 to 15%, we would activate targeted strategies to accelerate hiring, improve retention, and address any underlying challenges contributing to the higher vacancy rate. Our recruitment and retention efforts remain a top priority. The HR team works closely with all departments to advertise jobs on multiple platforms, participate in job fairs, and engage in the community. We've also expanded our employee wellness and recognition programs, encourage internal promotions, and offer training and development opportunities. These initiatives are designed to support retention and maintain a high-performing workforce. Vacancies are a dynamic challenge, but we are committed to being an employer of choice, where we can attract and maintain employees who want to be a part of our high-performing team. We'll continue to use market data, feedback from departments, and best practices to improve recruitment and retention outcomes. This is a receive and file report. We are not requesting any council action at this time. We're happy to answer any questions.
Good report. Thank you. Thank you for anticipating the question we would ask is what's our vacancy rate now? Because it's for last year. So good work. Good staff work there. Any questions for staff? No questions. Let's hear. Is there any public comment on this item? Opening public comment. I don't see any public comment. We're going to close public comment, bring it back to the council. Again, any questions or from staff? No. Close the public hearing. Is there an action on this?
No.
Okay. That's it. So we receive and file. So thank you.
Thank you.
Both. Good presentation. Okay, we are at 6 o'clock on the dot. Look at that. So I'm going to adjourn to special closed session, and Anne Marie, we're going to call a special closed session order. Can we do a roll call?
Councilmember Jones.
Here.
Councilmember Kemp.
Here.
Councilmember Whalen. He's here.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Orgill.
Yes.
Mayor Renagi.
Here, we're going to take public comments on closed session items as listed on the agenda. I don't see any public comments. I'm going to close public comments, and then we are going to adjourn to closed session.